Good evening and welcome to Mr. Nightveil, where the shadows of vacation hide the darkest nightmares. Tonight, we take you inside 6 of the most disturbing resort horror stories. True tales that will make you think twice before your next getaway. Let us know in the comments. Where are you watching from, and what time is it there? If you enjoy chilling mysteries and real-life terror, make sure to like, subscribe, and share your own vacation nightmares. Let's dive in. Our first story takes us to a popular Caribbean resort that has been shaken to its core by mysterious disappearances that chill even the most seasoned travelers. The Caribbean, where the turquoise sea shimmers in the morning sun, palm trees sway in gentle trade winds, and every evening sky is painted in gold and flame. Coral Haven Resort was one of those dreamy destinations, all-inclusive, 5-star, and quietly famous among Americans for its privacy and security. For married couple Jaden and Elise, both in their early 50s and empty nesters from Minnesota, Coral Haven represented the ultimate celebration. A 10th anniversary and the start of a long-planned, 3-week, once-in-a-lifetime escape from routine. The first days felt magical. Spa appointments, candlelit dinners on the terrace, snorkeling tours among dazzling reefs. The staff went above and beyond, always present, attentive, and personable. Jaden especially connected with Miriam, the concierge, whose laughter lit up the lobby and who promised to secure a reservation at a hidden local bistro for their anniversary. Between the friendly smiles and the gentle rhythm of the Caribbean waves, Jaden felt her worries floating away. But by their 5th night, Jaden noticed something strange. At the breakfast buffet, the usual waitress Noah was gone. When Jaden asked about her, the new waiter just smiled nervously and mumbled that Noah was visiting family. That evening, Jaden saw Miriam, whom she'd been eager to thank again, being hurried through a staff door by 2 uniformed men. When Jaden tried to wave, Miriam avoided eye contact, her hands trembling as she clutched a clipboard. The next morning, Miriam was gone. The front desk manager, when asked, gave the same answer, family emergency, but wouldn't meet her gaze. Jaden mentioned her concern to Elise, but she laughed it off. "It's a busy place," she said. "People come and go all the time." She suggested they focus on enjoying the trip. Still, a shadow had crept into Jaden's mind. Small things began to add up. A night porter in tears by the staff shed, hushed arguments in an unfamiliar language drifting from service corridors, a notice in the lobby asking guests not to enter the East Wing due to renovations, though workers were never seen. Another couple whispered to Jaden about hearing arguments and banging sounds at 2 a.m. from behind a locked maintenance door. The rumors grew. Someone claimed a staff member was let go after breaking rules. Another that security cameras were added, following a string of thefts no one wanted to talk about. On the 8th evening, everything changed. Elise left for a late swim. She'd fallen in love with the quiet at dusk. But as darkness fell and the pool emptied, she didn't return. At first, Jaden expected her to appear brushing sand from her feet, joking about the water's warmth. After 20 minutes, she went to look for her, finding her towel but no sign of her wife. She searched the pool, grounds, and snack bar, then reported her missing to security. What followed was a frantic search that dragged on all night. Security officers swept the grounds, their radios buzzing with arguments in Spanish and Creole. Management quickly convened a guest welfare meeting, assuring attendees that such situations were rare and that every effort was being made to locate Elise. Local police were called only after Jaden broke down in tears and demanded outside help. Jaden was barely sleeping by then. What kept her going was fear, and the conviction growing stronger with every hour, that something within the resort was being hidden. Where others might have given up and flown home, Jaden took advantage of her insomnia, exploring the resort at night. She found the staff entrance propped open, revealing a scratchy radio broadcast and the scent of bleach. She watched as a delivery truck dropped off not only food and linens, but also large padlocked crates the staff seemed wary of handling. Determined, Jaden befriended Elena, a young maid clearly afraid. In exchange for cash, Elena revealed that several workers had vanished recently. Some claimed they were fired and sent home for policy violations. But Elena didn't believe it. No one saw them leave, and some had left personal belongings in their lockers. Passports, wedding rings, photographs of children. Elena had heard that anyone who questioned the disappearances was threatened or let go without reference. Digging deeper, Jaden spoke with a German guest named Maisie, who traveled regularly for work and had an eye for details. Maisie had noticed that, along with missing staff, a handful of other guests, mostly solo female travelers, had checked in but never appeared in the lounge or on tours. Security logs provided by an off-duty bartender showed rooms being reassigned quietly and files scrubbed from the booking computer. Jaden, once pragmatic and rational, began to fear for her own safety. Someone was watching her. She noticed the same maintenance worker by the elevator every night, eyes fixed on her whenever she passed. Her room keycard stopped working twice, the night manager offering a toothy, insincere apology each time. On the 12th night, chasing a lead, Jaden entered the east wing, awkwardly stumbling into a windowless corridor filled with locked doors and peeling paint. She heard muffled voices, but before she could investigate, 2 security guards appeared and escorted her forcefully back to her room, issuing a stern warning not to wander off for her own safety. Those hours were the longest of Jaden's life. She was confined to her room for her well-being, relieved only when Elena slipped her a phone to call the U.S. Embassy. It took courage and luck to transmit a message containing her full name, Elise's, and the resort location. She sobbed her way through the call, barely comprehending what would follow. At first light, police and consular officials descended on Coral Haven. Their sweep revealed what Jaden and the frightened staff had suspected: a hidden network in the resort's east wing and basement. Investigators found rooms divided by security doors, with strong locks, surveillance cameras, and cages disguised as storage for laundry. A rescue operation began. Authorities saved 6 missing hotel employees and 3 foreign travelers, all drugged and locked away under brutal conditions. Elise was found. She'd been knocked unconscious and hidden in a locked utility closet, waiting to be transferred. Disoriented and dehydrated but alive, she was physically unharmed beyond bruising and severe shock. The fallout was immense. Coral Haven was immediately closed, its owners arrested as part of an international human trafficking and forced labor investigation. Local news and later international press reported on the bravery of Jaden, whose refusal to ignore her intuition had saved not only her wife, but a dozen other victims. Jaden and Elise returned home shaken but grateful, spending weeks giving statements to authorities. They became advocates for vacation safety and international anti-trafficking laws, Jaden especially warning other travelers to always follow their instincts, ask questions, and value the lives of the workers whose unseen labor underpins every paradise. For Jaden and Elise, the joy of their anniversary trip was forever scarred. But their courage became a story of hope in the darkest of places. The resort's glossy brochures promised paradise, but behind closed doors, a human nightmare was waiting. The next time you gaze out at a Caribbean sunset, remember Jaden and Elise. And remember that even in paradise, shadows can hide in plain sight. Stay tuned as we delve into our next resort nightmare. Our second story takes us far from tropical beaches to the snow-capped peaks of Colorado, where a luxury ski resort becomes a frozen prison when nature unleashes its fury. The Alpine Summit Resort, perched majestically at 10,000 feet elevation in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. Its timber frame architecture and floor-to-ceiling windows offering breathtaking views of pristine wilderness. For vacationers seeking the perfect winter escape, it represented everything they craved: world-class skiing, gourmet dining, and the kind of rustic luxury that wealthy Americans paid premium prices to experience. But in February 2025, what began as a dream vacation for dozens of guests would transform into a nightmare of survival that would test the very limits of human endurance and reveal the darkest aspects of human nature. Brooklyn marketing executive Aspen had booked her week-long stay at Alpine Summit as a celebration of her recent promotion and as an escape from the relentless pace of New York City life. At 38, she was an accomplished professional who had worked her way up through sheer determination. But the stress was beginning to take its toll. Her doctor had recommended this trip, suggesting that time in nature might help restore her perspective and reduce her anxiety levels. The resort seemed perfect when she arrived on a crisp Sunday morning. Her suite featured a private balcony overlooking the main ski runs, a fireplace that crackled invitingly, and amenities that rivaled the finest hotels in Manhattan. The other guests were an eclectic mix of affluent families, young couples on romantic getaways, and solo travelers like herself seeking adventure or solitude among the peaks. But by Tuesday evening, everything changed. Weather forecasters had predicted a significant storm system moving through the region. But what arrived was something far more devastating than anyone had anticipated. The blizzard struck with unprecedented fury, bringing winds that exceeded 70 miles per hour and snowfall rates that measured nearly 4 inches every hour. Within 6 hours, the resort was completely cut off from the outside world. The access road, which wound precariously down the mountainside for 23 miles before reaching the nearest town, became impassable within hours. Power lines snapped under the weight of accumulating snow and ice, plunging the resort into darkness except for the emergency generators that provided minimal lighting and heat to essential areas. Most critically, all communication systems failed, cell towers toppled, internet connections severed, and even the resort's satellite communication equipment was damaged by the storm. Resort manager Carson, a seasoned hospitality professional who had managed mountain properties for over 15 years, found himself facing a crisis unlike anything in his experience. The emergency protocols he had drilled with his staff covered typical winter emergencies, but nothing had prepared them for complete isolation, with 63 guests and 28 staff members trapped together with rapidly dwindling supplies. The first 24 hours after the storm struck were marked by a spirit of cooperation and even adventure. Guests gathered in the main lodge around the massive stone fireplace, sharing stories and playing board games by candlelight. The kitchen staff rationed food carefully but creatively, preparing meals that maintained some semblance of the luxury dining experience guests expected. Children built snow forts in the protected areas near the building, while adults organized group activities to maintain morale. But as the second day dawned with no sign of rescue and the storm continuing unabated, the mood began to shift. The resort's backup generators, designed to provide power for 12 hours during brief outages, were struggling to heat the massive building in sub-zero temperatures. Guests were asked to vacate their individual rooms and gather in communal areas to conserve heat and fuel. personal comfort gave way to collective survival needs. Food became the first serious concern. The resort's kitchen had been stocked for normal operations, not for feeding dozens of people during an extended emergency. Carson made the difficult decision to implement strict rationing, reducing everyone to 2 modest meals per day. Fresh water became another worry when the main pumps failed and pipes began freezing despite the emergency heating. By the 4th day, as food supplies dwindled to critical levels and the cold penetrated deeper into the building, the veneer of civilization began to crack. Arguments erupted over food distribution, with some guests demanding larger portions based on their perceived importance or the amount they had paid for their stays. A group of wealthy corporate executives attempted to organize a separate, exclusive area where they could hoard supplies away from other guests. Aspen found herself caught between competing factions as social dynamics deteriorated. The families with children formed protective alliances, while solo travelers like herself were viewed with suspicion. Some guests accused Carson and his staff of hiding food or keeping better supplies for themselves. Others demanded that rescue attempts be prioritized for certain individuals over others. The psychological pressure intensified when strange incidents began occurring throughout the resort. Guests reported hearing unexplained sounds in the night, footsteps in empty corridors, voices whispering in languages no one could identify, and doors that opened and closed on their own. The isolation and stress were clearly taking their toll, but some incidents seemed to defy rational explanation. Local folklore, shared by longtime staff members, spoke of ancient spirits that inhabited these mountains. Restless souls of miners and settlers who had perished in avalanches and blizzards over the past century. According to legend, these spirits, grew agitated during severe storms, feeding off the fear and desperation of the living. What had once seemed like quaint mountain mythology began to feel ominously relevant as unexplained phenomena multiplied. On the 6th night, when the situation reached its most desperate point, Aspen witnessed something that challenged her rational worldview. While searching for additional blankets in a storage area, she encountered a figure in old-fashioned mining clothes who gestured toward a hidden room she had never noticed. Inside, she discovered preserved food supplies and winter equipment that had been forgotten for decades, enough to sustain the group until rescue arrived. Whether the figure was a hallucination brought on by stress and cold or something more supernatural, Aspen never determined. But the discovery saved lives and restored hope among the trapped guests and staff. The additional supplies allowed them to survive until the 8th day, when military rescue helicopters finally managed to reach the resort and evacuate everyone to safety. The aftermath revealed the full scope of their ordeal. 3 guests had required hospitalization for hypothermia and malnutrition. Several relationships and friendships formed during the crisis continued long after the rescue, while others were permanently damaged by conflicts that arose during the desperate hours. Most significantly, the experience had stripped away the social pretenses and revealed fundamental truths about human nature, both its capacity for selfishness and its potential for courage and compassion. For Aspen, the week at Alpine Summit became a defining experience that changed her perspective on life and priorities. She left her high-stress marketing career within months of returning to New York, ultimately opening a small business focused on emergency preparedness consulting. The isolation and terror she experienced in the mountains taught her that survival often depends less on material resources than on the strength of community bonds and the human capacity to adapt under extreme pressure. The Alpine Summit Resort was rebuilt the following year with enhanced emergency systems and communication redundancy. But for those who lived through that February blizzard, No amount of preparation could erase the memory of how quickly civilization's comforts could disappear, leaving only the most basic questions of survival and the mysterious forces that seemed to watch over travelers in the wilderness. The investigation into the supernatural incidents that occurred during the isolation never reached any definitive conclusions. However, local historians confirmed that the storage room Aspen discovered had been sealed since the 1940s, and the mining equipment found inside matched descriptions of gear used by prospectors who disappeared in an avalanche decades earlier. Whether her encounter was real or imagined, it served as a reminder that some mountains hold secrets that extend far beyond the dangers of weather and altitude. When nature strips away the luxuries we take for granted, we discover not only what we're truly made of, but also that we're never as alone in the wilderness as we think. Sometimes, salvation comes from the most unexpected sources, whether from the living or the long departed. Our third story brings us to the sun-soaked sands of Cancun, Mexico, where a popular all-inclusive resort hides deadly secrets behind its festive facade. The Casa del Mar resort stood like a gleaming fortress against the turquoise Caribbean waters, its white stucco walls and terracotta roof tiles promising exactly the kind of escape that weary travelers craved. For investigative journalist Jay, this wasn't just another vacation. It was a desperate attempt to recover from a year of covering some of the darkest stories in American journalism. At 47, she'd spent her career exposing corruption in corporate boardrooms and political offices. But the toll had left her exhausted and cynical. Her editor had practically forced her to take this 2-week sabbatical, threatening to reassign her stories if she didn't step away from her desk. The resort seemed perfect from the moment she arrived. Endless buffets featuring fresh ceviche and tropical fruits, multiple pools with swim-up bars, and staff members who seemed genuinely eager to ensure every guest felt pampered. But Jay's investigative instincts were too well honed to completely shut off. And within hours of her arrival, she began noticing details that didn't quite fit the polished image the resort was working so hard to project. It started with small inconsistencies. Guests who had checked in the day before her were nowhere to be found, not at meals, not by the pools, not at any of the evening entertainment. When she asked the front desk about a couple she'd met briefly in the lobby, she was told they had checked out early due to a family emergency. But their room appeared to still be occupied, with towels on the balcony and personal items visible through the sliding door. By her third day, Jay had befriended Harmony, a waiter who worked the breakfast shift and spoke excellent English with just a trace of a Mexico City accent. Unlike the other staff members, who seemed to deliver rehearsed responses to guest questions, Harmony appeared genuinely nervous when she asked about the missing guests. During a quiet moment when he was refilling her coffee, he leaned in close and whispered, "Some guests, they ask too many questions, and then they leave very suddenly, always in the middle of the night." That conversation sent chills down Jay's spine, reawakening the investigative instincts she'd been trying so hard to suppress. That evening, instead of attending the resort's mariachi performance, she retreated to her room and began doing what she did best: research. Using the resort's Wi-Fi, she accessed missing persons databases and cross-referenced them with the resort's guest reviews and social media posts. What she discovered was deeply disturbing. Over the past 18 months, at least a dozen people who had stayed at Casa del Mar had subsequently been reported missing by their families back home. The disappearances weren't immediately obvious because they occurred after guests had already checked out, and the victims were typically solo travelers or couples without children. People whose absence might not be noticed for days or weeks after they failed to return home. But the pattern became undeniable when Jay dug deeper. The missing guests had all been professionals in industries that might make them valuable targets. Technology executives with access to proprietary information, financial advisors managing high-net-worth clients, and even a federal prosecutor who specialized in organized crime cases. Each had paid for extended stays at the resort, and according to their final social media posts, all had been planning to disconnect completely during their vacations. Armed with this information, Jay began conducting her own surveillance operation within the resort. She noticed that certain guests were receiving special attention from staff members, extra drinks, invitations to exclusive areas, and opportunities to book private excursions that weren't advertised to other visitors. These guests were being specifically targeted, though for what purpose remained unclear. The breakthrough came on her 6th night, when insomnia drove her to take a walk along the beach at 2 a.m. The resort's public areas were deserted, but as she walked past the marina area, she noticed unusual activity. A sleek yacht had docked at a private pier behind the resort's main building, and several men in security uniforms were unloading wooden crates while armed guards watched the perimeter. None of this activity was taking place at the resort's main dock, which was clearly visible from guest rooms, but rather at a hidden facility that could only be accessed through service corridors. Jay used her phone to discreetly record the operation, capturing faces, license plates, and the yacht's registration numbers. When she researched the vessel later, she discovered it was registered to a shell company with known connections to one of Mexico's most violent drug cartels. The pieces were finally falling into place. The resort wasn't just hiding criminal activity, it was serving as a sophisticated front for money laundering, human trafficking, and the elimination of potential witnesses. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous her situation became. Her room was searched while she was at dinner, though nothing appeared to be taken. Her phone began receiving calls from blocked numbers. When she answered, she heard only silence, but the message was clear. Most troubling, she noticed the same man appearing in multiple locations throughout the resort, always watching her, always staying just far enough away to avoid direct confrontation. Realizing that traditional law enforcement channels might be compromised by the corruption that often surrounded cartel operations, Jay decided to take matters into her own hands. Using her journalism credentials and social media following, she prepared a comprehensive exposé that would be impossible to suppress or ignore. Working through the night in her room, she compiled all her evidence into a detailed report complete with photos, videos, and documentation of the missing persons connected to the resort. On her final morning, just hours before her scheduled departure, Jay went live on multiple social media platforms simultaneously, broadcasting her findings to her professional network and the general public. She streamed for 37 minutes, laying out the entire conspiracy while showing real-time footage of the resort's hidden operations. The broadcast was picked up by major news outlets within hours, creating an international incident that forced both Mexican and U.S. authorities to respond immediately. The federal raids that followed were swift and comprehensive. Mexican military forces, working with U.S. DEA agents, stormed the resort and its hidden facilities, uncovering a sophisticated criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. They rescued 3 American citizens who were being held against their will and recovered evidence linking the operation to dozens of disappearances across Mexico and Central America. But Jay's victory came at an enormous personal cost. The cartel members involved in the operation were eventually arrested or killed in subsequent raids, but she remained a target for their associates and family members seeking revenge. She was forced to relocate, change her identity, and abandon the journalism career she'd spent decades building. The woman who had sought a peaceful vacation to escape the darkness of her work had instead uncovered a nightmare that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Her story became a cautionary tale that resonated far beyond the world of investigative journalism. Travel advisories were issued for dozens of resorts suspected of similar activities, and her exposure of the Casa del Mar operation led to a comprehensive overhaul of security protocols at vacation destinations throughout Mexico and the Caribbean. But for the families of those who had disappeared before Jay's investigation, her courage provided something even more valuable: answers about what had happened to their loved ones and justice for those who had preyed upon innocent travelers. The Casa del Mar resort remains closed to this day, its building standing empty as a testament to the dangers that can lurk behind even the most beautiful facades. And somewhere, living under an assumed name in a location known only to federal authorities, Jay continues to write. Though now she focuses on stories that don't require her to venture into the heart of darkness that nearly consumed her. When paradise becomes a prison and vacation becomes a nightmare, remember that sometimes the most beautiful places hide the ugliest secrets. The next time you're sipping a margarita by a crystal-clear pool, ask yourself, who else might be watching, and what might they want from you? Our fourth story takes us to the sun-drenched tropical paradise of Maui, Hawaii, where a luxurious wellness spa retreat promised healing and serenity, but delivered something far more sinister. The Maui Wellness Sanctuary sat like a jewel against the dramatic volcanic landscape of Hawaii's second-largest island. With its infinity pools overlooking the Pacific, meditation gardens filled with native flora, and treatment rooms carved from volcanic stone, it represented everything modern travelers sought: escape, rejuvenation, and a chance to reconnect with their inner selves. This was where Lily had planned the perfect reunion with her college friends, a celebration of 20 years of friendship and a collective pause from the chaos of their middle-aged lives. Lily, now a successful marketing executive in San Francisco, had orchestrated this trip for months. She'd convinced her 4 college roommates to join her for what she promised would be the ultimate wellness experience. There was Shiloh, a pediatric nurse from Chicago whose career caring for others had left her emotionally drained. Ophelia, a corporate lawyer from New York whose high-stress lifestyle had begun taking a visible toll. Eliana, a divorced mother of 3 from Portland who desperately needed time away from the demands of single parenthood. And Lena, a psychology professor from Seattle who specialized in stress-related disorders but couldn't seem to manage her own anxiety. The first few days unfolded like a perfectly choreographed wellness fantasy. They began each morning with sunrise yoga on a platform overlooking the ocean, the volcanic peaks of the Big Island visible in the distance. Breakfast consisted of organic tropical fruits, locally sourced fish, and herbal teas blended specifically for detoxification and mental clarity. The spa treatments were exquisite. Hot stone massages using volcanic rocks, seaweed wraps harvested from local waters, and aromatherapy sessions featuring indigenous Hawaiian plants. But it was during their 3rd day that the first disturbing incidents began to surface. Following a new, advanced detox protocol that the spa director had enthusiastically recommended, several members of the group began experiencing severe physical reactions. Shiloh, whose medical training made her acutely aware of normal detox symptoms, was alarmed by the intensity of their side effects. Violent nausea, disorientation so severe they couldn't remember conversations from hours earlier, and tremors that made simple tasks like holding a water glass nearly impossible. The spa staff dismissed these symptoms as normal reactions to the powerful cleansing process. But Lily noticed something troubling in their responses. The smiles seemed rehearsed, the explanations too polished, as if they'd been delivered many times before. When pressed for specifics about the detox ingredients, staff members became evasive, citing proprietary blends and ancient Hawaiian healing secrets. By the fifth night, sleep had become elusive for all of them. But this wasn't the peaceful, meditative awakening that the retreat literature had promised. Instead, they were tormented by vivid, terrifying nightmares that felt more real than any dreams they'd ever experienced. Ophelia woke screaming at 3 a.m., claiming that shadowy figures had been standing around her bed, speaking in languages she couldn't understand. Lena reported dreams of being trapped underwater while voices called her name from above the surface. Most disturbing were Eliana's nightmares of her children being taken away, while she stood paralyzed, unable to move or speak. During the day, paranoia began to creep into their group dynamic. Conversations became fragmented and suspicious. Shiloh, normally the most rational among them, became convinced that the staff was monitoring their private conversations. Ophelia's legal instincts kicked in, and she began documenting every interaction with the spa personnel, taking photos of their meals and keeping detailed notes about their daily activities. Lily's marketing background had taught her to recognize when something was being deliberately obscured, and every interaction with the spa management set off alarm bells. During what should have been a relaxing group meditation session, she overheard hushed conversations between staff members about Phase 2 protocols and monitoring subject responses. These phrases sent chills through her, especially when combined with the increasingly clinical way the staff had begun observing and documenting their behavior. Unable to shake her growing unease, Lily began conducting her own investigation. Using skills learned from years of corporate research, she accessed areas of the facility that guests weren't meant to see. In a restricted office area, she discovered medical files that revealed the horrifying truth. The Maui Wellness Sanctuary was serving as a cover for illegal pharmaceutical trials. Guests were unknowingly being administered experimental psychiatric medications through their food, beverages, and even topical treatments. The documentation she found detailed a systematic program of human experimentation. The retreat's serene setting and emphasis on healing provided perfect cover for testing new drugs designed to treat anxiety, depression, and PTSD. Guests were selected based on psychological profiles created from their intake questionnaires and monitored throughout their stays. Adverse reactions were documented but not reported to authorities. And guests who became suspicious or questioned their treatment were either silenced through additional drugging or removed from the program entirely. When Lily attempted to confront the spa director with her discoveries, she was met with cold hostility instead of the warm, nurturing facade she'd grown accustomed to. Dr. Cashton, who had presented himself as a holistic healing pioneer, revealed himself to be something far more sinister. He calmly explained that she and her friends had signed extensive waivers that gave the facility broad rights to administer various treatments, and that their remote location and the nature of their detox program made it unlikely anyone would believe their claims. That night, Ophelia disappeared. Her room was found empty, with no signs of struggle, but also no indication that she had left voluntarily. Her belongings remained undisturbed, and security footage from the corridors had mysteriously malfunctioned during the critical hours. When the remaining friends demanded answers, they were told that Ophelia had suffered a psychological episode and been transferred to a mainland facility for treatment. The remaining 4 women realized they were trapped. Their isolation on the remote Hawaiian location, combined with the legal documents they'd signed and their increasingly compromised mental state, meant that escape would require careful planning and clear thinking, both of which were becoming more difficult as the experimental drugs continued to affect their cognitive abilities. Lena's background in psychology proved crucial as she recognized the signs of pharmaceutical manipulation and helped the group develop strategies to minimize their exposure to the drugs. They began secretly disposing of their meals, drinking only bottled water they could verify, and avoiding all spa treatments. As their heads began to clear, the full horror of their situation became apparent. Using her legal training, Shiloh discovered that the retreat's contracts contained clauses that essentially made them subjects in medical research, without their informed consent. The facility had been operating this illegal program for over 2 years, with dozens of unsuspecting guests serving as test subjects for various experimental medications. Their escape came through a combination of cunning and courage. During a staged medical emergency involving Eliana, who convincingly simulated an allergic reaction, the friends gained access to the facility's communication center. Lena managed to send a detailed distress message to both local authorities and the FDA, providing specific information about the illegal drug trials and their location. The rescue that followed brought federal agents, medical personnel, and media attention that shut down the Maui Wellness Sanctuary permanently. The investigation revealed a network of similar facilities operating across multiple states, all funded by pharmaceutical companies seeking to bypass traditional clinical trial regulations. The aftermath was devastating for all involved. The friends required extensive medical treatment to counteract the effects of the experimental drugs, and the psychological trauma of their experience strained their relationships with each other and their families for years to come. Ophelia, who had been transferred to a secure facility for treatment, was found weeks later in a psychiatric hospital, heavily sedated and suffering from severe drug-induced cognitive impairment. Their legal battle against the pharmaceutical company behind the experiments lasted 3 years and resulted in one of the largest settlements in medical malpractice history. But for Lily and her friends, no amount of money could restore the trust they'd lost, both in the institutions that were supposed to protect them and in the healing spaces they'd once sought for comfort. This story serves as a chilling reminder that the most dangerous predators often hide behind facades of care and healing. The next time you enter a wellness retreat or spa, remember Lily and her friends and ask yourself, who is really being served by the treatments you're receiving? Our fifth story takes us deep into the mystical red rock canyons of Sedona, Arizona, where promises of spiritual healing mask a terrifying web of psychological manipulation and control. The Serenity Springs Wellness Retreat, nestled like a hidden gem among Sedona's towering red sandstone formations, its adobe buildings and meditation gardens designed to blend seamlessly with the desert landscape. For wealthy Americans seeking alternative healing and spiritual awakening, it represented the pinnacle of luxury wellness tourism, a place where ancient wisdom met modern comfort, where troubled souls could find peace and transformation away from the chaos of contemporary life. Patricia Williams, a 52-year-old corporate executive from Chicago, had arrived at Serenity Springs carrying the weight of recent devastating losses. The past 18 months had shattered her carefully constructed life. A messy divorce that cost her half her assets, the sudden death of her teenage daughter in a car accident, and a subsequent nervous breakdown that forced her to take extended leave from her demanding job at a Fortune 500 company. Her therapist had recommended this retreat as a way to process her grief and rediscover her sense of purpose. The initial days at Serenity Springs felt like exactly what Patricia's broken spirit needed. She was assigned to a simple but elegant casita with panoramic views of the surrounding canyons, where she could practice morning yoga on her private terrace while watching the sunrise paint the rocks in brilliant shades of orange and gold. The retreat's daily schedule included guided meditation sessions, nutritional workshops, therapeutic massage, and group discussions led by charismatic spiritual leaders who spoke eloquently about the power of surrender and the necessity of releasing attachment to material concerns. Dr. Marcus Thornfield, the retreat's founder and lead spiritual guide, was particularly compelling. A former psychology professor who claimed to have studied with Tibetan monks and Amazonian shamans, He possessed an almost hypnotic presence that made his words seem profound and transformative. During group sessions, he spoke about the need to strip away the ego's illusions and embrace the death of the false self in order to achieve true enlightenment. His teachings resonated deeply with Patricia's pain, offering a framework that made her suffering seem meaningful rather than merely tragic. But as the days progressed, Patricia began to notice subtle changes in the retreat's atmosphere and her own state of mind. The daily schedule became increasingly rigid, with mandatory participation in all activities and harsh consequences for those who missed sessions due to illness or fatigue. Sleep was deliberately limited to 4 hours per night, which leaders explained was necessary to break through the ego's resistance to transformation. Meals consisted of increasingly sparse portions of raw vegetables and herbal teas that left participants constantly hungry and mentally foggy. More troubling was the systematic isolation from the outside world that began almost immediately upon arrival. Cell phones were confiscated for digital detox, and guests were discouraged from contacting family members or friends during their stay. When Patricia asked about calling her sister to check on family matters, she was told that such attachments represented ego clinging that would interfere with her spiritual progress. Letters from home were screened by staff and often delayed or lost entirely. The psychological pressure intensified during individual counseling sessions with Dr. Thornfield and his inner circle of senior guides. These sessions, which occurred daily and sometimes lasted for hours, involved intensive questioning about Patricia's past mistakes, personal relationships, and deepest fears. The leaders used information she shared in confidence to systematically undermine her self-worth and independence, convincing her that her previous life had been meaningless and that only complete submission to the retreat's teachings could save her from spiritual destruction. Patricia found herself experiencing disturbing psychological symptoms that the leaders claimed were normal parts of the purification process. Memory gaps made it difficult to recall conversations or events from just hours earlier. Vivid hallucinations, which she was told were spiritual visions, left her questioning her grasp on reality. Most disturbing was the gradual erosion of her sense of personal identity. She began to feel as if Patricia Williams no longer existed, replaced by someone whose thoughts, feelings, and desires were entirely shaped by the retreat's teachings. The other guests appeared to be experiencing similar transformations, though the process affected different people at different rates. Some participants, particularly those who had been at the retreat for several months, moved through their days like sleepwalkers, speaking only in the specialized spiritual language they had been taught and showing no interest in their previous lives or relationships. Others, like Patricia, still retained enough awareness to feel disturbed by what was happening, but found themselves increasingly unable to articulate or act on their concerns. The breakthrough came during Patricia's 3rd week, when she discovered a storage room containing personal belongings that had been confiscated from guests over the years. Family photos, jewelry, prescription medications, and legal documents that revealed the retreat's systematic theft of participants' assets. Hidden among these items were journals written by former guests who had managed to document the psychological abuse and financial exploitation they had experienced before their final entries abruptly ceased. The most chilling discovery was a recording device containing audio of private counseling sessions in which Dr. Thornfield and his associates discussed their methods for breaking down participants' psychological defenses and transferring their wealth to the retreat's accounts. The recordings revealed that Serenity Springs was not a legitimate wellness facility, but rather a sophisticated psychological operation designed to exploit vulnerable people seeking healing from trauma and loss. Armed with this evidence, Patricia began to covertly organize resistance among the guests, who still retained enough mental clarity to understand their situation. The task was extraordinarily difficult because the sleep deprivation, malnutrition, and constant psychological manipulation had left most participants in a state of confused dependency. Many guests genuinely believed that the retreat had saved them from their previous deluded lives and viewed any criticism of the program as evidence of spiritual weakness or ego attachment. The escape attempt came during the retreat's most intensive ceremony, a 3-day death and rebirth ritual held in a remote canyon location several miles from the main facility. Dr. Thornfield had promised that this experience would complete their transformation and grant them permanent liberation from suffering. In reality, Patricia realized, the ceremony was designed to finalize their psychological subjugation and possibly eliminate those who continue to show signs of resistance. Using the chaos and exhaustion of the ritual as cover, Patricia and 4 other guests managed to slip away from the group and begin the treacherous journey across the desert toward the nearest town. The escape was harrowing. They had no food, limited water, and were pursued by retreat security personnel who had been trained to track and recapture spiritually confused participants. The Arizona desert at night was brutally cold, and during the day, temperatures soared above 100 degrees. 2 of the escapees collapsed from dehydration and had to be left behind with promises that help would be sent. Patricia and the remaining survivor, an elderly woman named Eleanor, who had lost her life savings to the retreat, stumbled into a gas station after 36 hours of walking. The authorities they contacted initially viewed their story with skepticism. Dr. Thornfield's reputation in the spiritual community and the retreat's carefully crafted public image made their claims seem incredible. However, the evidence Patricia had gathered, combined with testimony from other escapees and a subsequent investigation by federal agents, eventually exposed the full scope of the operation. Serenity Springs was shut down, and Dr. Thornfield was arrested on charges including fraud, imprisonment, and psychological abuse. The investigation revealed that the retreat had systematically stolen over $12 million from participants over a 5-year period, with some guests losing their entire life savings and retirement funds. The legal proceedings dragged on for years, during which time Patricia struggled to rebuild her life and recover from the psychological trauma she had experienced. The retreat's techniques had been so effective that she sometimes questioned whether her memories of the abuse were real or whether she had imagined the entire ordeal. Therapy helped her understand that this self-doubt was itself a symptom of the manipulation she had endured, a final cruel gift from those who had exploited her vulnerability. Many of the retreat's victims never fully recovered. Some had been so thoroughly psychologically broken that they remained institutionalized, unable to function independently. Others had signed over their assets so completely that they faced homelessness and poverty in their later years. The 2 escapees who had collapsed during the desert flight were found dead from exposure, their bodies discovered weeks later by park rangers. For Patricia, the experience became a defining trauma that shaped the rest of her life. She never returned to her corporate career, instead dedicating herself to educating others about the tactics used by predatory spiritual organizations and supporting survivors of psychological abuse. Her ordeal had taught her that the human mind's capacity for healing and growth, the very qualities that made spiritual seeking meaningful, could also make people vulnerable to those who would exploit their deepest needs and fears. The Serenity Springs facility remains abandoned, its adobe buildings slowly crumbling under the relentless Arizona sun. Local authorities have declared the property unsafe, but hikers occasionally report finding personal belongings scattered in the canyons, remnants of lives that were shattered in the name of spiritual transformation. The case serves as a stark reminder that predators often hide behind the most beautiful promises, and that those seeking healing in their darkest moments must be especially vigilant about those who claim to offer salvation. In places where broken souls seek light, the deepest shadows often dwell. When someone promises to heal your deepest wounds, ask yourself, what might they gain from your pain? And remember that true healing never requires you to surrender your autonomy, your assets, or your ability to leave. Our sixth and final story brings us to the windswept cliffs of Oregon's coast, where time itself becomes a prison and the past refuses to stay buried. Sunset Cove Resort, perched dramatically on a rugged promontory overlooking the Pacific Ocean, its weathered cedar buildings and stone pathways designed to blend harmoniously with the wild coastal landscape. Unlike the tropical paradises and luxurious spas featured in travel magazines, this boutique retreat attracted guests seeking solitude, contemplation, and connection with nature's raw power. The resort's marketing promised a timeless escape where every moment feels eternal. But for marine biologist Mario, those words would prove far more literal than she could have imagined. At 34, Mario had dedicated her career to studying the ocean's mysteries, spending months at sea documenting the behavior of deep water species and the impact of climate change on marine ecosystems. But the recent loss of her research vessel in a storm off the Aleutian Islands, an accident that claimed the life of her research partner and closest friend, Dr. Rowan, had left her struggling with survivor's guilt and questioning her life's work. Her university had mandated this leave of absence, and Mario chose Sunset Cove because its isolation and dramatic setting reminded her of the remote research stations where she had spent her happiest professional moments. The resort seemed perfect when she arrived on a gray Thursday afternoon in late October. Her ocean view suite featured floor-to-ceiling windows that revealed an endless expanse of churning waves, while a telescope on the private balcony allowed for stargazing on clear nights. The other guests were an eclectic mix of artists, writers, and professionals seeking inspiration or respite from demanding careers. The staff was attentive but unobtrusive, allowing visitors to commune with nature on their own terms. But on her second morning at Sunset Cove, Mario experienced something that challenged her scientific worldview. She awakened to the same gray light filtering through her windows, the same weather pattern she had observed the previous day, and the same conversation between two guests in the hallway outside her room. Initially, she dismissed it as coincidence or the disorienting effects of grief and stress. Coastal weather could be remarkably consistent, and resort routines naturally created predictable patterns of behavior. However, as the day progressed, the similarities became impossible to ignore. The breakfast server made the exact same comment about the storm system approaching from the northwest. The elderly man reading Hemingway in the lobby turned the same page at precisely 10:47 a.m. Most unnervingly, Mario found herself responding to situations with words and actions that felt simultaneously spontaneous and predetermined, as if she were following a script she had somehow memorized. By evening, when she watched the sunset paint the sky in identical shades of amber and crimson as the night before, Mario could no longer deny what her rational mind rejected. She was somehow reliving the same day. That night, she lay awake documenting every detail she could remember, determined to test her impossible hypothesis when morning came. The third iteration of the day confirmed her worst fears. Every conversation, every weather pattern, every seemingly random event unfolded exactly as before, except for her own growing awareness and the subtle changes she could make through conscious effort. When she deliberately spilled coffee on her notebook during breakfast, the stain remained, proving that some aspects of her experience carried forward even as time reset around her. But Mario's scientific training had not prepared her for the psychological toll of temporal imprisonment. Each loop brought subtle variations that suggested she was not simply experiencing a mechanical repetition, but rather caught in something far more complex and sinister. Conversations with other guests revealed disturbing inconsistencies. Some remembered fragments of previous loops, while others seemed completely oblivious to the repetition. A few guests displayed personality changes that grew more pronounced with each cycle, as if the temporal anomaly was gradually eroding their fundamental identities. The resort staff exhibited the most troubling behavior. While most employees moved through their routines with robotic precision, a few seemed aware of the time loop, but were bound by some invisible constraint that prevented them from discussing it directly. Gia, the resort's elderly concierge, began leaving cryptic notes for Mario that hinted at the property's tragic history without explicitly acknowledging the supernatural situation they faced. Through these clues and her own investigation of the resort's archives, Mario gradually pieced together the dark events that had created their temporal prison. In 1892, Sunset Cove had been the site of a whaling station owned by Captain Ezra Blackwood, a ruthless man who had grown wealthy by exploiting both the ocean's resources and the labor of immigrants desperate for work. The captain's daughter, Layla, had fallen in love with a young Chinook man named Jane, whose people had fished these waters for countless generations before European settlement. When Captain Blackwood discovered their secret relationship, his rage was terrible and swift. He accused Jane of theft and convinced the local sheriff to arrest him on fabricated charges. But Layla's love was stronger than her father's hatred, and she attempted to help Jane escape by boat under cover of darkness. The captain and his men pursued them into a fierce storm, and in the chaotic confrontation that followed, both young lovers were killed. Jane shot by the captain's rifle. Layla drowned when their boat capsized in the violent surf. According to local Chinook oral traditions, which Gia's grandmother had preserved and passed down, Layla's dying curse trapped the promontory in an endless cycle of guilt and regret. The captain never recovered from the horror of what he had done, and within a year, he had lost his fortune, his sanity, and finally his life to alcohol and despair. But the curse persisted, creating temporal distortions that affected sensitive individuals who came to the site carrying their own burden of unresolved grief and guilt. The revelation that her own emotional state had somehow triggered the time loop was devastating for Mario. Her survivor's guilt over Rowan's death had made her vulnerable to the supernatural forces that haunted Sunset Cove, trapping her in a prison of repetitive time that reflected her inability to move forward from tragedy. But understanding the curse's mechanism also provided a possible path to freedom. She would need to confront not only the historical injustice that had created the temporal anomaly, but also her own psychological wounds that kept her bound to the past. The confrontation came during the loop's most dangerous variation, when a violent storm struck the coast with unprecedented fury. As other guests huddled inside the resort's main building, Mario made her way to the cliff top where the original tragedy had occurred. The wind and rain were so intense that she could barely remain upright. But she pressed forward, driven by the certainty that this was her only chance to break the cycle. At the cliff's edge, where waves crashed against the rocks hundreds of feet below, Mario experienced a supernatural encounter that defied everything she thought she knew about reality. The spirits of Layla and Jane appeared to her, not as terrifying ghosts, but as young people trapped by circumstances beyond their control, much like herself. Through their communion, conducted in words that seemed to bypass language entirely and speak directly to her consciousness, she understood that the time loop could only be broken by an act of genuine forgiveness and acceptance. But the forgiveness required was not just for Captain Blackwood's historical crimes or even for the supernatural forces that had imprisoned her. Mario had to forgive herself for surviving when Rowan had not, for the choices that had led them into dangerous waters, and for the simple human limitations that made tragedy sometimes inevitable, despite the best intentions and careful planning. The moment she truly released her guilt and accepted that Rowan's death was neither her fault nor something she could change by reliving it endlessly, the temporal prison shattered. The storm cleared. The sun broke through the clouds. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Mario watched the sunset, knowing that tomorrow would bring a genuinely new day. The other guests remembered nothing of their shared imprisonment, waking the next morning with no awareness that they had been trapped in repetitive time. But several spoke of unusually vivid dreams and a strange sense of relief, as if some burden they hadn't realized they were carrying had finally been lifted. The resort staff, including Gia, treated Mario with special kindness, though they too seemed to have no conscious memory of the supernatural events they had witnessed. Mario left Sunset Cove profoundly changed by her experience. She returned to her research work, but with a new appreciation for the mysteries that existed beyond the reach of scientific instruments and rational analysis. Her subsequent papers on ocean conservation were infused with a deeper understanding of humanity's relationship with natural forces that went beyond mere environmental stewardship to encompass spiritual and emotional connections with the living planet. Years later, she would sometimes dream of Layla and Jane, no longer trapped by their tragic circumstances, but finally at peace in whatever realm awaited beyond the veil of linear time. And whenever she faced periods of grief or guilt in her own life, she remembered the lesson learned on that windswept cliff. That healing sometimes requires not just understanding the past, but finding the courage to forgive it and step forward into an uncertain but genuinely new future. Sunset Cove Resort continues to operate, its guest reviews consistently praising the property's peaceful atmosphere and the profound sense of renewal that visitors often experience during their stays. The management has never acknowledged any supernatural phenomena, and most guests leave with nothing more extraordinary than beautiful photographs and restored spirits. But occasionally, sensitive individuals report strange dreams, feelings of déjà vu, and the odd sensation that they've lived certain moments before, as if the thin boundary between past and present remains forever permeable at this haunted but ultimately healing place. Time may be linear for most of us, but in certain places where great love and great tragedy have intersected, the past never truly dies. Sometimes, the greatest prison is not a cell with bars, but the weight of our own unresolved grief. And sometimes, the key to freedom lies not in changing what happened, but in finally accepting what cannot be changed, and choosing to step forward into the unknown. As our 6 tales of vacation nightmares come to a close, remember that the most beautiful destinations can hold the deepest mysteries, and that sometimes our greatest journeys are not to distant places, but into the depths of our own hearts, where healing or horror awaits. If these stories gave you chills, like and subscribe to Mr. Nightveil for more spine-tingling tales. Hit the bell and tell us in the comments, have you experienced something unexplainable during your travels? Until next time, sweet dreams, if you can.